who coming here. And if you can, turn on your videos. So hi, everyone. I'm out in Los Angeles this week working at El Camp, a workspace in El Segundo, California. I'm visiting my mother. I'm not sure if Eric Johnson is on the line, but he's the CEO, and he's created this amazing space here. So I'm loving being here while I'm visiting family in LA. So before we start, click in the chat section for those who are on live stream. Introduce yourself. Give me your name, your company, what city you're dialing in from. And what I love is that we have people all over the world on this call and on live stream. And if you can, turn on your video because we want to have you in the conversation. And for those who are watching on live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, you can interact with us as well. So you can just type in the comments. So just like the folks who are in the Zoom room, put your name, your company, your title, where you're from in the comments. And I'll be moderating those pages as well. So if you have any questions later on for our guests, you can ask in the comments. So please add your info in the comments. So this is a microlearning. It's a training and development that focuses on offering bite-sized small learning units with just the right amount of information to help learners achieve a goal. So this is not a webinar where you passively listen and learn. So give me 1 second real quick.
What'd you
Okay. So, and as we are from community focus, we want you to connect with 1 to 3 people on this call to really be able to kind of hold each other accountable. Okay, so this is not just one of those one and done, you watch it and then you go. We want you to actually learn something from this. We want you to actually grow, right? So today's topic is on how to communicate better with Emmy award-winning television journalist Jane Hansen. Before we begin, we always start our call with a quick poll. So top right-hand side, you should be in gallery mode so we should all see each other. For this next activity, top right-hand side, once again, put yourself in gallery mode and turn on your videos if you can. We always start our call with a poll. Ready? Raise both hands like this if the answer is yes. How many of you on this call identify as an introvert? And if you are on live stream, you can just type it, yes. How many of you identify as an extrovert? Once again, if you're on live stream, just type in extrovert. How many of you have had public speaking communication skills training, workshop, coach? How many wish you could communicate better? How many of you are aware of your body movement when you speak? Okay, so thank you everyone. So top right-hand side now, you can put it in speaker mode so you just should be able to see me. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for making this call. So being able to communicate effectively is probably the most important thing you can do to get ahead, both professionally and personally. I have not always been a good communicator, and I still need some help on it. I still have a lot of room for improvement. And the thing is, I do this professionally, right? I go into corporations to talk. I host these calls, and I still get afraid like nothing before each of these calls, right? So there's quite a few people who raised their hands when I asked the question earlier about discomfort with speaking in public. Many of you who have been coming to these Community of 7 Let's Talks or micro learnings for a while know this about me. I'm an introvert. So it takes a lot of energy for me to speak to audiences like this or anything outside of a one-on-one conversation. I'm very comfortable with one-on-one conversations. People naturally assume that I'm an extrovert because my profession is about building relationships and communities and moderating conversations. Makes sense, right? But my natural inclination is to listen rather than speak. So whenever I do interviews, I always tell the story and tell people that I'm an introvert because I want all the introverts out there who may be on this call to understand that you can get better with practice. So I really had to work my way through my fear and discomfort with communicating because I realized that my success in life was tied to how well I could communicate. So the way I got through this fear was this. I challenged myself to have conversations with random strangers, literally at work, in the supermarket, at the local 7-Eleven, anywhere I went. I challenged myself to spark a conversation with a stranger and just talk about anything. It could be about the weather, their hairdo, their nice outfit, how expensive gas got. I did this for an entire year, and you don't understand how deathly afraid I was of speaking to strangers in the past. And you know what? I lost my fear of speaking. And during that process, I learned that the more I was able to lean into my fear, and the less scary it got, and the easier it got to communicate with others. It helped me personally, professionally, and it helped me do what I'm doing right now, talking to you all. And I hope by the end of this call, you take that chance and work on bettering yourself because it can change your life. If there's one thing you can do at this moment that will change your life and the trajectory of your career is to become a better speaker. That's why I'm so excited to soon introduce my guest, Jane Hansen, who is one of the best in the business. But before I do, I want to tell you a quick story. Many of you didn't raise your hand when I asked if you're a good communicator. I want to tell you two stories. First, no one really knows this about me, but for all of grade school, I was in ESL, which is English as a second language, all throughout grade school. We have a pretty big global audience watching this from all over the world. So a quick explanation: in the US, if the school deems that your second language is English and that you're not proficient in English, then you're put in English as a second language. And it's a small class with other students who don't speak English as a first language. And here's the thing. When I came to the United States and my family escaped Vietnam as refugees, I was 8 months old. So by the time I got into first grade, English was my first language. However, the teachers, because of the way I looked and the assumptions they made about me being a refugee, put me in the ESL class for close to 6 years, even though I spoke English as my first language. Looking back, I think I internalized this because I never really spoke for most of my elementary. Like I literally did not speak and the teachers thought I was mute. It wasn't until my 6th grade teacher who believed in me asked me to join a debate team. I ended up winning the debates and I became the debate champion for the whole school. And that changed my perception of my ability to communicate. The second story I'm going to tell you is this. I was watching an interview with Lauren Rogers, who is a mental performance coach who worked with the New York Yankees. And she shared a story about how she was working with an athlete and he kept on giving her curt one-word answers. Yes, no. She got really offended. She finally asked him, because it really upset me, why, like, are you angry at me? Why are you giving me these one-word answers? He dug a little deep and he said, I'm not upset at you at all. I'm just not a good speaker. So Lauren asked him, where did you hear that from? He got quiet for a second. He dug deep and he realized that it was the first time happened in first grade when he was asked to read out loud and he struggled. The teacher told him, you are not a good speaker. Upon hearing that story, Lauren asked the athlete, who's telling you that now? He thought for a moment and he said, I am. I want to ask the folks on this call or on live stream, who's telling you you aren't a good communicator? Where did it come from? Beliefs and actions create your identity. My life trajectory would have totally been different if that teacher in 6th grade didn't believe in me and got me to debate in the 6th grade. Your beliefs are created by the experiences and they're forged by your emotions. So we subconsciously adopt the thinking pattern by learning it from the people who most influence us at an early age, our parents, our teachers, and our friends. Then we act according to it. And since what we do creates the results we see, the general faulty personal story becomes a reality of our own causing. So this is how most of us operate through the best times of our lives. Pause right now and think, who's telling you the story? So quick question before I introduce our guests. For everyone on this call, and so for people on the live stream, I want you to put it in the comments. For people who are on the live Zoom room, I want you to type in the comments, but don't press send until I tell you so. So what's the one thing that you could do to improve your communication skills? This could be something that you think you need to improve or that other people have told you that you need to improve. Type it in. What do you think you could do? I'll give you an example. When I was young, I didn't realize it, but I would interrupt people. I'm really impatient. So because I didn't want to have conversations with people and because I was uncomfortable talking to people, I would just answer their question before they actually finished asking the question. And if someone spoke too long, I would interrupt them. Really rude, right? But I didn't realize it until someone told me. So in the comments right now, type in what is the one thing that you could do to improve your communication. I'm going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Press send. Okay, slow down, practice, be succinct, comfortably nudge people with clear comms, listen more. I like that. So there's a lot of practice getting out of your words, being authentic, speaking up more, slowing down. I love that. And I think on the live stream too, we have kind of similar comments as well. So finally excited, today's guest is an Emmy award-winning television journalist and coach, Jane Hanson. I am so super excited for this call. She's spent over 30 years helping people learn to communicate better. She has won not one, not two, 9 Emmy Awards. She is a former co-host of New York Live on NBC TV. She hosted Jane Hanson's New York on WNBC TV, as well as co-anchored Today in New York. Jane has served as a fill-in newsletter on the Today Show for the likes of John Palmer, Deborah Norville, Faith Daniels, Margaret Larson, Matt Lauer, Ann Curry. She's been named the Correspondent of the Year by numerous organizations. She's a Forbes magazine contributor, is which how I met her. She's also been the recipient of numerous other awards and service to her community. She is a past president of the New York chapter of the National Academy of Television Arts and Science. So Jane, if you can unmute, I am so excited for this conversation and I can't wait to hear about your thoughts and how we can become better communicators. So for the next part, I know we're gonna skip the slides. So just kind of tell me, how did you become an amazing communicator? Where did you learn the skill set?
I learned it by mistake. Is the truth. First of all, I want to tell everybody the way that you and I met was because I did an article on Forbes that I included you in because it was a terrific article about reaching the heights and what you just described about being an introvert and then how you kind of were forced to become much more out there, especially as a communicator, is when you actually because of COVID, your job got eliminated at Fortune magazine and you created this wonderful community and you had to be there. And you told me a couple of really amazing things in that interview. One of them was find your North Star or be the North Star. And I just took that to heart because I'm thinking all the time about how with other people and how you can lead them, how you can be thoughtful to them, how you can be a great communicator with them is about being their North Star. So I really applaud you and what you've done in the past year plus. I mean, creating this thing out of nothing and moving on to your next step, which I think you have to admit is probably the best thing that's ever happened to you in your life besides having your children or your daughter, right?
Yes. Totally. I love that.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, it's really amazing what you have done and how you've taken yourself to the next step. So when you asked me that question about how I learned to communicate, a lot of it was by trial and error. And by the way, it is not, most people don't like to be put on a stage. Jerry Seinfeld, the comedian, used to tell this great joke that at a funeral, most people would rather be in the coffin versus giving the eulogy because of the fear of public speaking. It always ranks up there right after kind of death and taxes. So it's not unusual, and most people don't truly love it. I happen to adore being in a space where I can talk to others. And how did that happen? It happened because of the job that I had in television, which forced me to do it, just like you've been forced to do what you're doing. So I grew up in rural Minnesota. And by the way, I'm so thrilled to see all these people from all over the world here. It's like, I feel like we have a universal community and we can all talk together. And I just love that. It makes me very excited because we don't do enough of that. And we've been hindered, in the last 17 or 18 months from doing it. So I grew up in this little tiny town way on the southwestern border of Minnesota. If any of you remember the show called Little House on the Prairie, that took place in a town that's very close to where I grew up in. So imagine this place that's nothing but prairie for miles and miles and miles and miles. If you stood on the highest hill, you thought you could see the Rocky Mountains. That's how how open it is. So as a little girl, I grew up in a very large community of family around me. My parents had lots of siblings, so I had lots of cousins. And there were always lots of people. So you can get lost kind of in that with a whole big family. And so I was a little shy as a young woman. And in fact, when I got to New York and was on television, one of my sorority sisters from a college I went to actually called the television station. She was in New York then as well, working for a PR firm. She called the television station. She says, "Is that the same Jane I went to school with? I can't believe she's there in front of a camera," because she always seemed like she was such an introvert. But I guess my thoughts are that you literally can become, if you don't have to stop being an introvert, but what you do have to do is learn how to communicate, because trust me, it will help you in every aspect of your business. And Lan, I reckon you've recognized that, correct?
Yes, totally. Totally. I don't have huge advertising budgets, so my voice and social platforms is the only way I can get my message out.
And by the way, it's extraordinarily effective because it's like grassroots. It's so much more believable and it's so much more credible because it's coming from the heart and the soul of the human being who's doing it versus some kind of incredible ads you could be doing that, yeah, they're going to be beautiful and spectacular, but we all know that somebody's paid for them and spent a lot of money on them, and it's not coming from the same place that this is coming from. So I really admire that. And what you talked about when you said you challenged yourself to have conversations with strangers, I did the same thing. And I would do it in elevators. I would do it, and I even do it to this day. And it's something so simple as I walk down the street and I say, "Good morning. How are you?" And people look at you, and at first they're kind of taken aback, and then they go, and then they smile. And all of a sudden, there's kind of a little bit of a connection. And I think those connections are probably more important than ever because we've all been so isolated for a while in the past few months. I think that's really, really important. So the other thing that you did, which is also something that people all absolutely identify with, is you told a personal story. And when you're vulnerable and open like that to share something personal, that makes a huge difference in the way you communicate with others. Being vulnerable is one of the greatest things you can do. And I think that we all, if we're vulnerable, we're open. When we're open, we communicate better. And people feel like they know you better when you do that. So that's a really big part of communicating well.
Can I pause you for a second on that? Because, I've spent probably the past 20 years in the corporate world, and you're taught the opposite. Don't show emotions, don't show your vulnerabilities, don't show weakness. And so that's kind of like the ingrained belief system that I had to kind of dig out in order to start Community of Seven and be my authentic self. Like, how do you kind of combat that when in the corporate world you're taught the opposite?
Well, I'm going to tell you that that's changing. in the corporate world. And the reason I know that is because I do a lot of work. Every day I'm training people about communication from big corporations and smaller corporations. And what they've learned, especially the leaders have learned through this pandemic, is that they need to find a place to be compassionate, to be vulnerable, to be open, to be far more communicative about how people are feeling. Remember, you asked me for my favorite quote, and here's what I use in every single training of mine, which is from Maya Angelou. And basically it says, people will forget what you did, they'll forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And so that's what's happening in the corporate world now, is this notion of empathy. We have to show empathy because we've got people who are stuck at home. They're in all kinds of wacky situations. They're unsure of their future. We don't know what the future is going to hold, but we've got to find a place to reassure them and keep them with us, because if we lose them, we don't know how we're going to replace them. So this notion of empathy has become prominent with virtually every single major corporate person I'm working with these days. And I find that to be a giant shift from the way things were. It's this, another thing they say is that here's what they expect people to think in their head is, we don't care how much you know until we know how much you care.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So you kind of mentioned, the fact that you kind of started talking to strangers. You talked about really focusing on telling stories and being vulnerable. I remember watching an interview with Oprah, who is probably one of the most amazing of communicators. And someone asked her, how did you become Oprah? And she was like, I just read a lot, which was interesting. I didn't expect that answer, but the whole notion of reading and hearing about other people's stories and learning how to kind of conceptualize and put things together was, I think, very interesting. What other kind of practical tips could you give to the folks who are either watching in the live room or in live stream, in terms of how they can get better, going from point A to point B?
Well, one of the things that somebody said in the chat was the idea of listening. Listening is crucial. And if you listen to people and you ask them questions and you're curious, and I mean legitimate questions, by truly listening to them. If somebody says something, you go, well, tell me how that happened. The most important things you can use are the tools of a journalist, which are, the 5 W's and the H: who, what, when, why, where, and how. That's how we learn a story, the content of a story. But if you're talking to somebody and they tell you a little something, you say, how did that happen? Why did that happen? Who was involved? And you just, if you ask those questions, you will find the most interesting answers. And that person is going to think you are the greatest communicator in the world, because you haven't told them very much about yourself, but you have asked and inquired about them. And that's true empathy. That's true understanding. That is a connection that will always serve you well. And I'm not saying that you should eliminate your own feelings and your own inner self from this, but we're too quick in a conversation to interrupt. You talked about how you interrupted when you were a little girl, which I find in complete contrast with being an introvert, but whatever. But you would interrupt. And the thing about interrupting is that means somebody doesn't get to finish what they wanted to say. And when you interrupt, it means you're not really listening. You're just thinking about, ooh, this is what I want to say next. And you're not even listening to what the other person is saying. So you have to really listen and think, what is it that I want to know about this person? What are they saying that I can react to, that I can interact with? Because that's the way we communicate well. And
Love that.
yeah, and I want you to remember that all of life is really just a conversation, no matter if you're on television or if you're giving a speech or whatever you're doing. One of the things I find really interesting about some of my clients is there'll be the person who's about to give a keynote address. And suddenly, instead of being, Joe, my next door neighbor, he's now become, I'm Joe, the speaker. And they become boom, 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 boom. And you're like, you're being fake. That is not you. You have to be authentic. You have to be your real self. So it's a work in progress for a lot of people, and it does involve an investment of your time. And in the case of, where people hire somebody like me, it's an investment of money, but I'm telling you, it pays off in spades. Think about it. If you're going to learn to play the piano, you're going to take lessons. If you're going to learn to play golf, you're going to take lessons. If you're going to do almost anything, you're going to invest some time and some money in it. People think, oh, I don't have to do that to become a great communicator. But the truth is, if you want to know some tricks of the trade about how can I make the best speech I ever have to speak for, maybe I'm getting an award, maybe I've been asked to keynote something, maybe I'm moderating a panel, maybe I'm being interviewed on television. You want to make a great first impression, because in today's world, we don't get a chance to have a second impression. So it's really kind of worth the investment. I have a question for everybody, because this kind of directly falls in line with that idea of communicating and how to communicate well immediately right off the beginning. How long do you think the attention span is in the United States and probably most of the world today? And I mean, just when you start to have that background conversation.
So everyone who on live stream, or everyone who is in live audience, put it in the chat and then answer that question. So what's the attention span for the average American, or just people in general, right? Put it in the chat.
Because it's pretty much universal. We're not that unique in the US. I mean, we got a lot of issues, but I think this is pretty much across the board. So I'm saying 15 seconds, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, less than 15, 2 minutes, 5 seconds, blah, blah, blah. I see. Interesting. So many different answers here. Thank you all for participating. The correct answer is 8 seconds. Which 8 seconds. Now that doesn't mean they're not paying attention. It just means that second conversation in your head, like some of you are thinking right now, what am I having for dinner? Or maybe you're thinking, did I remember to pay that bill, or whatever it is? You just like, there's a random thought that's coming through your head and you might be paying attention to it. That's a second conversation. But so 8 seconds. And according to Microsoft, which did some kind of a big study on this, that is a second less than the average feeding time of a goldfish. So there.
So we have the attention span of a goldfish.
Less than a goldfish.
Less.
So which means that we have to be super engaging when we're doing, like you've been, in this conversation land, you've been really engaging with your stories, with the way you're talking, with some of the things that what I see you using with your body language and your voice, even though we've only got this much of us, these days. Mm-hmm. So it's about being truly as engaging as you can be. And one of the things that happens in a place like Zoom, or when you're doing an interview, maybe or doing a podcast, or doing any kind of an interview, etc., is we have to amplify our energy. I learned a long time ago in television that a TV camera drains about 30% of your energy, which means that, and you can apply it to Zoom, the more engaged you are, the better it's going to come across. So we really want to think about being super engaged when we're doing this. It's really important. Now, there's 3 things I focus on when I talk about communication. 1, who are you talking to? Who's your audience? The second thing is, what are you saying? What's your substance? And the third thing is, how are you delivering it? Which of course gets into the whole realm of body language. It's not as easy to do it in this situation as it is in person, because you can't see the whole human being. We're only seeing this much of each other. And we're not seeing all the other things that with the body language that will make us kind of connect or not connect. One of the things about body language that is so interesting is that for most of the existence of mankind, for the millions of years we've walked on Earth, we did not have a spoken language. We've only had one for 160,000 years. So that means we innately connected by the things we did with our body. So think about it. One great way of doing this is sit on a street corner or sit on a bench and watch people walking by, and you're going to make up a story about them and they haven't opened their mouth. You're going to make up a story by their posture, by the way they're walking, by the way they look, by their eye contact, by all these other things that have nothing to do with what they're saying. Same thing. I challenge you to turn on your television and watch a show with the sound off. you're going to still be able to get a lot of the story. You're going to be surprised by it. So what does that mean if we put that in real terms for today's world? What that means is that we have to think about, how am I coming across with the way that I'm presenting myself, with body language I'm using? Another question. How important do you think body language is compared to the substance of what you're saying? If you could give me a percentage out of 100. Anybody want to make a guess on that?
Can you repeat that again?
So out of 100%, how important do you think the body language, the way you're using your physical body and the way you're using your voice compared to the substance? What would you give the visual and the verbal parts, your body language versus the content?
So on live stream and also in the chats, I'm seeing a lot of 90, 95%, 70% body, 100%, 60%.
Well, the correct answer is 93%.
Wow.
Now, I don't mean that content isn't important, because if you don't have anything to say, who cares how you say it, right? But the bottom line is 93% of the way we are perceived, the way we are listened to, the way we engage, the way we connect, has to do with the way we deliver it. So that's now, how am I using my voice? What's my pace, my pitch, my tone? I mean, think about tone. If I said, really, you're going to do that? You're going to say, oh man, she is irritated. But if I say, really, you're going to do that?
Can I share something that's kind of embarrassing, but really helped me? I had to read a book to my daughter's kindergarten class, and I was so scared because I didn't want to bore these kids, because you know how kids are when they're bored. And so I really practiced and worked, but it's like, and it was on Zoom, right? And so I was really cognizant of body attention, my facial expression. And that actually helped me become a better speaker, because I was so cognizant of the kids and I would actually watch their interactions. And so I knew I had to be like big, because the screen is so small, right? We only have this small little screen. So it made me better at speaking in the professional world, I guess, because I was so deathly afraid of speaking to these kindergartners.
That's a great story. And let me tell you why. Here's what happens. We, as children, we are very vulnerable. We're very of the moment. We're very present. Our emotions are, we're happy one minute, we can be sad the next, and then we're happy again. Somewhere in our teenage years, we lose that. And our ability to communicate directly kind of lessens. As we mature, we get fearful. We're not as open as we could be. One of the things that I make people do is become over dramatic when we're delivering a speech or something. I just say, we're just going to video it. And I make them get completely out of their comfort zone. And believe it or not, most of the time when they look at that video, they say, wow, that's so much better when I delivered it than when I delivered it the other way. Why? Because they're allowing themselves to be natural. They're allowing their emotions to come through. They're allowing their feelings. Remember I told you about the Maya Angelou quote, they're letting their feelings be known. Don't be afraid to do that, because it can be really effective. So reading a children's book and wanting to really engage is a great exercise.
You know what this also reminds me of is Beyonce. So Beyonce had to create, because she's naturally an introvert, what you see, you think she's like this amazing, she is amazing and awesome and all this other stuff. But in the real world, she's an introvert. So she had to create this alter ego called Sasha Fierce in order to be on stage and be sexy and be kind of like this, boom. And I thought that was really interesting, like basically creating an alter ego for yourself, because naturally when you see me outside of the camera, I'm pretty like, I'm more comfortable reading a book in silence than it is, being out there and talking. But I know that for this stage, I can't be that way. And so like, I don't know if I've created an alter ego, but I always think of the Sasha Fierce and Beyonce whenever I'm like nervous and about to get on stage or talk to a big group of people.
I understand that. And I think there's nothing wrong with creating something that makes you feel more comfortable. Whatever tools that you can help, that you can use that are going to get you to your, to that place where you're comfortable. And it's all about getting comfortable, because remember, again, it's just a conversation. It's that, use them. There's nothing wrong with that. I see somebody, David Hansen, what a great last name. Ha ha ha. It says, can you be over dramatic without being fake? Yes, I guess you can. I mean, no, you can definitely be over dramatic without being fake, but I want you to just get to the place where you're really comfortable in being your authentic self. And being your authentic self is allowing your feelings and your vulnerability to show. That's really hard for people. And sometimes they feel like they're being fake. It's so funny because I was working with this client the other day, and we were watching video because I use video all the time to help people. And he was so struck by the fact that his resting face, you know, that resting face when you're listening, his resting face was just awful. He looked really cranky and like grouchy, like.
I think they call it resting bitch face.
Exactly. And he was, anyway, he was so upset about that face. And he goes, what am I going to do about that? And I said, well, I have to tell you, you do it all the time, because I've been watching you as we've been talking in this session. It was like 4 people there. And I said, you've been doing it the whole time. And I said, I keep wondering if you're like pissed off at me because of the way your face is. And then suddenly you'll smile and you start to talk. And it's like, it's unnerving, the contrast between that face and what you do. And he goes, well, how do I fix that? And I said, I want you to try doing a small smile, and not a big smile, but a smile that is, I want your face to be friendly. And he started to do that. He was practicing it. And when we videoed him the next time, that was the face we got when I was interviewing him, mock interviewing him. And that was the face we got. And he goes, oh my God, that's so much better. And I said, does it feel phony? And he goes, not when I know what the result is. And the result is now that I'm showing the feelings that I really have, instead of looking like I'm angry, because I'm not angry at all. So it was interesting.
So you kind of mentioned, so, you know, in preparation for this interview, I looked at some of your past interviews, and you mentioned as a reporter that one of your biggest tasks was really to condense really complex concepts and events and condense them into a minute or two. And can you explain why it's so important to do so, and how people who are in this call or room or on live stream, because some of us are professionals, we're speaking in boardrooms. For some of us, we are like startup founders and we need to pitch our company in 2 minutes. Why is it important, and how can we get better at being more succinct?
Well, there's a couple of things that I would tell you to that end. You know, it's interesting because I never realized what an important skill that was, because as a reporter, we would take mountains of information and we would condense it down so that we could spit it out in a 1.5 minute or a 2-minute story. So, and when I mean, it's real. So I made these editorial decisions every day of my life to say, this is what's important. This is what's key. This is what the people need to know in this short period of time that I have. It turned out that that's one of my best skills for working with people now, as a communication expert and coach, because I can take their stories and I can find a way to make them very succinct. And how that works is you really need to think about, what's my headline? Strip everything away and think, what do I want the people that are listening to this to walk out of the room with, or to walk away from the Zoom call with? That key line. Is it that you want them to buy something? Do you want them to endorse something? What do you want them to take away? So you have to have that at the very beginning, because the very beginning, again, remembering that attention span, you got to get them at the beginning. So if it's, I want you to join the community of 7 because you will learn things you're never going to learn anywhere else. Okay, now you could have taken 6 paragraphs of outlining, here's what you're going to learn because this is really wonderful. And you could have taken a whole bunch of time to do that, but you got to be direct and you got to be concise. And it's really crucial that you do that. The second thing is, after you have this headline, then I like to think of 3 key points that you can say. And what are those 3 key points? One of them would be, you could, when you take those 3 key points. And why 3? Because you'll probably have 9 points. You probably got 20 points, but nobody's going to listen that long. We like 3s. We like truth, justice, and the American way. What is it in France? Liberty, unity, eternity. I can't remember. Fraternity, something like that. Maybe somebody knows. So truth, you've got Earth, Wind, and Fire, the 3 Musketeers. I mean, 3s just seem to work. So think about 3 points, and they can be very simple. My price is right, the product is really needed, and we're very efficient in getting it to you. So it's really thinking about, what can I do that's going to make this really succinct? In the television business, in television news, we had to keep viewers tuned in. And so we have what we call grabbers. Remember when you watch a television newscast, you'll hear this, coming up, the line in the sand is drawn in Washington, fire taking over Oregon, and you'll have like 3 or 4 headlines. You want a headline like that that's going to grab people so they pay attention. So I think that that's really important to do when you're trying to be succinct. And in television, the other thing, many major shows that have been gigantic hits began with a less than 30-second pitch. You got to be able to tell your story in 30 seconds. If you can't explain it in that amount of time, who the heck is going to listen to it and understand it as well? So it's really important that you make that nice and succinct. That's crucial. The other thing you need to think about is your audience. Who's listening to this? So you want to tailor it to the audience. Like we've got an international audience. So I don't want to say things that are specific to a part of the United States here, because I want it to be something everybody can use, whether you're in New Zealand or in, I think, Jamaica. I saw all kinds of places that are here. And so you want to make it so that it's a universal audience. You also want to think about, how old are they? Do they have a particular point of view? How do I persuade them when I know that they're way over here and I'm way over here? How am I going to do that? So you've got to think about your audience as well when you're putting together what you're going to say and how succinctly you're going to say it. I mean, you do that when you're talking to potential investors or people that you want to come and speak, or when you're doing interviews, etc. You think about, who's your audience. Always make sure that's very, very clear. It's really important to do.
I love that. And so kind of rewinding back to you, I was watching one of your kind of interviews, and you talked about one of your most pivotal interviews you had, and it was with Desmond Tutu. Can you tell us more about that experience and why it was so profound for you?
So I am sent to Lower Manhattan to St. Luke's, right outside of St. Luke's School. And Desmond Tutu, the South African anti-apartheid leader, is in New York, and I think he was going to speak at the UN or something. And so I went down to interview him, and we're sitting on a park bench and we're having this lovely interview, and I'm almost done, and the people who are with him come to interrupt me. Now, as a reporter, you're running around town, you're always like busy. And I thought, oh, come on, please don't interrupt me, I'm almost done. And they said, no, you really want us to interrupt you. And I went, really? And they said, trust us. So they pulled him aside. He comes back, there's tears in his eyes. And it turns out he just had learned that he'd won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I was, I'm doing this interview with this man who's been so incredibly important in the life of South Africa and thus the world in achieving or working towards equality, working towards fairness, working towards justice. And as I'm listening to him and asking him these questions, both of us are crying. And it is something that has stuck with me from that moment on. And it was profound to be in the presence of such majesty and to listen to the words in which he spoke. And by the way, he was humble, and he talked about those that he worked with, and that this was for all of them and for the people that he served. And it was an amazing moment that I've never forgotten. So, but here's another ancillary to that. I was wearing this crazy flowered dress that day, and I sent my video went all over the world because I was the first person to interview him right after when he found out that he'd won, and I was wearing this crazy like loud pattern flowered dress, and I sent the video to my then agent, and he writes back and he goes, "Great interview, but why were you wearing that dress?" So.
Well, it's memorable.
Okay.
So we're going to open for some questions. Let me know in the comments if you have any question. And I think, Cynthia, you've raised your hand. Do you want to unmute and ask your question, Cynthia, and maybe turn on your video if you'd like? Or you could actually ask your question in the comments too. I think I see Cynthia raising her hands. No? Okay, she's not muting. Amanda, do you want to ask your question? Unmute.
Hi, Lan. Thank you. Yeah, and Jane, it's been so great to hear you. So thank you both. I always love that you host these awesome sessions. Thank you, Lan. I'm a creative director, and I actually don't have a challenge with communication and public speaking. I did want to share something. I went through a boot camp. I went through Speakeasy. And one cool thing I wanted to contribute to the group, which is one of the exercises that they gave me was to identify your hero and somebody who you really admire. And then we had to go home that night and do research and, look up that person and look up like how they spoke. And there were a lot of really cool, and then we had to come back the next day and talk more about why we really liked what they were about. So like how their body language, how they spoke. Mine was DVF, Diane von Furstenberg, and I really love how there's a lot of reasons why she is a hero for me, some of her philanthropic work, and so it was really cool. And then you try to work that that's how we develop, I think, our sense of our public persona, so that it still is you, but it's very authentic. And you take also some of the influences that we really like from people who we admire, and then we put it through our filter of who we are.
I love that, Amanda. Well, thank you so much. Yes, did you have one other thing?
Yeah. I think there's a really rich topic also. I love that we talked about interruption. I think interruption's a really interesting thing, because that was something when I came from Los Angeles to New York, I really I felt like I landed in Mars, and I had to figure out how to deal with interruption, and like, do I want to join him, or do I want to lean back and kill or be killed? It was kind of like something I really had to wrestle with how to, I think we could talk a lot about that, but I want to leave time for all the other people. And thank you so much, Lan.
Thank you, Amanda. And it's interesting too now with mediums like Clubhouse, where it's kind of like the loudest voice wins. It's kind of interesting, kind of how technology kind of influences.
Yeah, I had to find out how I wanted to be with that, because my father taught us not to interrupt, but I also felt like, we're all leaders and creatives and trying to make a space for ourselves in the world, and also make space for other people. So the concept and the conversation about interruption is a really rich topic about how you want to be, and especially in what we talked about as well is, you have a tiny little bit of space to make for something to say.
But I think also,
I'll stop.
Yes. So as a moderator, my goal is to kind of also move the conversation. And so I do have to interrupt.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Jane, I think you wanted to say something.
I do. I have two thoughts on that. Number one, when you're talking about interruptions, I want you to think about understanding the culture of where you are, because in some places it's extraordinarily rude to interrupt, but in a place like New York, it's expected that you interrupt. So when I work with people from different parts, I've worked all over the world, I have to be very conscious of the culture and what's appropriate in that culture. So you need to think about that when it comes to things like interruptions or how fast you're going to speak. We speak a lot faster in New York City than you do in Atlanta, Georgia, for example. So be respectful of that. And I think respect is a really important part of how we communicate. The second thing, when you talked about, finding kind of a hero and somebody that you love speaking, that you love listening to speak, I think that's a great idea, because what that does is it gives you some other tools of the trade. It helps you learn a few tricks and that sort of thing. You talked about Diane von Furstenberg, and somebody else earlier had mentioned, maybe it was you, Lan, that talked about Oprah. One of the things that women, I shouldn't say women, everybody that's thought of as a really great speaker does, is they use some pauses. It makes you feel and seem a lot more credible and a lot more like a leader when you dare to take the chance to take a breath and let things sink in. And that's a really important communication tool.
I couldn't hear what you said.
Yeah. Well, that was my Siri.
Stop interrupting, Siri.
Yeah, seriously.
Rude.
Yeah. I just wanted to say one last thing, which is in Speakeasy, we got videotaped as well. And it was really helpful to watch ourselves and understand why we said, for me, it was, and I think that's really helpful what you just said, Jane, about, pausing and, why you say, and like. And see, I just did it. And
right. We do it to fill up dead air because we're afraid.
Well, I'm thinking too.
You're thinking. And then the other thing, there's two things that really will stop you from using those crutch words. One is pausing, and the other is great preparation. Because I find people that are well prepared never do like, so, duh. They never use those words when you're really well prepared.
Yes. Yeah, and
this is actually a really good question. As I interrupt, from Elizabeth Lewis. Actually, Elizabeth, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for this fantastic session. I'm loving it. My question is, what is the respectful way to interrupt people?
There's a couple of different ways, and some of it involves body language. Now, it's difficult to do on Zoom because I saw somebody earlier had asked about eye contact, because if you're really going to do a great Zoom session, you have to keep your eyes peeled on this little camera up here. And I tell people to put a little Post-it above it so that they'll remember to keep their eye contact there instead of looking at the reactions from everybody. But what you can do if you're not on Zoom and you're in real life is you can lean towards them. You make your body become almost that interrupter, which is a lot healthier and less intrusive when you're using your body versus your voice. And they suddenly will stop talking, or they'll suddenly look at you and there'll be a question and then you'll say, thank you so much. But as Lan did a couple of minutes ago, she said, as the moderator, I have to make sure that things move on. And you can say things like that are really respectful. Sometimes you can even turn to another person. You can say, that's such a great thought. Please hold that thought because I see somebody else over here has another question. But you can do it in a respectful way I just want you to use your proper tone of voice as well. And the good tone of voice is, thank you so much. We need to move on, or thank you, or hold that thought, but do it in a way that's not like, hold that thought, or wait, we got to move on. You have to do it in a tone of voice that's really kind. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's great.
It does. Go ahead.
Sorry. Didn't want to interrupt you. So I want to go to T. Stafford. Do you want to unmute and ask your question, or I think Jane kind of answered it, but do you want to reiterate it, T. Stafford?
Hi there. Yes, she did answer it perfectly. My concern was when you're talking to people, I know we want to do the eye contact thing, which is great, but sometimes if I'm boring them to tears, I need to know that. Or if they're like asleep or they're multitasking or they've gotten up and all I see is an empty chair.
Yeah.
I want to know, how can I gauge that? So
it's hard. It's so hard to do on Zoom. And it's particularly hard when 3/4 of the people, as they are here, do not have their cameras on. So I'm going to chide you a little bit because I don't know why you don't have your cameras on. I would love to see you all because it makes me more comfortable because I love to see people. But you don't know if they're paying attention or not. You just don't know. I think that, we all want the reaction. We all want to know. But by the same token, when we're on this screen, if I start to look over here and I'm looking at Amanda or Nikki, that's who I see on the top left. If I'm looking at them, then everybody else thinks I'm ignoring them. So we don't want that to happen. So you really, unfortunately, this is what we have at the moment. And part of this is great because we've got everybody from all over the world here, which we wouldn't have if we were trying to do this in person.
I love that. So last question, Sarah, you have a really great bachelor. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. Do you want to unmute and ask your question? I think you have a really good one.
Sure, yeah, hopefully my audio is okay. Thanks so much. Yeah, my question is more about prepping, right? I'm at this place where I just want to prepare and I want to be ready when I'm presenting, and it's a matter of what's the balance, right? I think I get so worried and I spend so much time and I think, oh gosh, did I overdo it? Is there a mix? And if there's any suggestions for practicing as well, that would be great. Thanks.
So what I would suggest is the following. I'm an over preparer as well. And sometimes I have to pull myself back because you got to recognize that time is precious. Time can be money. Time can mean a lot. So you have to think, what is my outcome? Again, getting back to that audience. What are you trying to accomplish with that? How important is this on your list of priorities? And I think the more important it is, the more time you probably need to spend on it. But you need to set yourself a schedule and say, this is what I'm going to allot. This is what's practical. And then think about also how much time are you going to use for the presentation? Is it a 20-minute presentation, a 5-minute, an hour long? Because the longer it is, the more time it's going to take to make it precise, concise, succinct, interesting, etc. So you really need to think about all of that before you begin to even work on it. And if you're going to do a presentation with slides, for example, never think about what slides do I have. Think about what do I want to tell them? And sometimes that will help you eliminate a whole bunch of stuff that otherwise you'd waste your time on. And then a great way of preparing is to take this little thing that we all have, our phones, and videotape yourself. Nobody else ever has to see it, so it's never going to be embarrassing. But the more you video yourself, the more you're going to think, man, that was great, or ooh, that wasn't good, or what am I doing with my eyes? What am I doing with my hands? What am I doing with this? So the more you videotape yourself, the more comfortable you're going to get. The more comfortable you get, the better it's going to be. So I really advocate for using video to become better at what you do. I think it's one of the finest tools we have. So video yourself and think ahead of time, how much prep time should I allot? Because I do way too much most of the time.
Never too much. I love that. So my final question for you, how can we support you? I've put on in the comment section, and I'll do it on live stream as well. Go to janehanson.com. You can find her on LinkedIn at Jane Hanson TV, Instagram, Jane Hanson Official, and twitter.com at Jane Hanson. You have any book coming out? How can this community support you?
Do you want to write one with me? We could write a great one.
I would love to.
I am about to start a podcast. I've been doing this live IGTV show. I started doing it during the pandemic, just more or less for fun, because I wanted to keep my interviewing skills sharp. And let's face it, we had a lot of time at the beginning to watch this stuff, right? I'm now going to take that to a podcast. I shouldn't say shot. I recorded the first one last Friday. It's going to start in September. It's going to be called Curious Jane, which was the name of my IGTV show. And I'm just going to tell you one little thing, that the first one's going to be about how communications in our sex life can actually help communications in our business life. So there you go. It's a little bit of a tease.
Well, I guess it depends on what your sex life looks like.
Good point. Good point.
Awesome.
So I'm doing, and I've got a lot of other projects going on. So you can find out all of it by just looking at me on LinkedIn. And if I can help anybody in any way with their communication issues, do them any kind of coaching, etc., I'm more than happy to do that. So I'd love to hear from all of you. And I thank you so much for your
Thank you, Jane. So everyone, if you can put yourself on gallery mode, and if you can take your camera, put your camera on, because I think Jane deserves a round of applause. So put your camera on, Andra, thank you. Put your camera on, Ashley, and give a big round of applause. Anil, put a big round of applause. Jane, you're so amazing. So when her podcast comes out, I want everyone to support it. I will, put a link to let us know, Jane, when it comes, and I'll email everyone. But thank you so much, everyone. That was amazing.
Thanks,
Jane, you are
Lan.
awesome.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're a great audience. Appreciate it.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Lan.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.